I once read that the average Roman soldier dreamed more about retirement than glory, and that says everything. I'm your bedtime historian, and tonight we're marching right past the monuments and into the mud to meet the legionaries who served not for honor, but for a half rotten ration and the hope of getting out alive. Picture a glinting bronze helmet on a sun baked recruit. Behind him, recruiters beam with pride. In front of him, an entire life disappears into dust and orders. Why did so many join if so few returned with anything worth bragging about? Why did their parents let them? What was promised and what was reality? If stories like this make you feel slightly better about that job you hated in your 20s, maybe drop a like and subscribe. I'm not saying a Roman garrison commander was your boss in a past life, but I'm not saying it either. Have you ever wondered which historical job most closely matches your daily grind? I'd love to hear it, especially if it's worse than a Roman latrine digger. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You smell it first. Not the battlefield, but the perfume of roasted barley and baked clay festival scents curling through the air. Somewhere nearby, a parade of standards flickers in the wind, crimson banners snapping with the same sharpness as the promises offered by Rome's recruiters. In the heart of the forum, a stage rises. A boy climbs atop it, dressed in gleaming armor, far too large for him. He raises a sword, shouts a rehearsed line, and the crowd erupts in laughter and applause. This is what the illusion looks like. Rome sold soldiering as a path to manhood honor, even social mobility. In murals and mosaics, legionaries are painted with squared jaws and heroic stances, their armor shining their expressions fearless. The recruiters, more performers than truth-tellers, roamed marketplaces praising the nobility of military service. Free meals, land on retirement, glory in foreign lands. But behind the banners and bravado lay a harsher reality. In truth, for every young man who joined, hoping to become a hero, dozens signed up simply because there was nowhere else to go. Farms failed. Debts mounted. Rome's promise of steady pay, however meager, was better than starvation. And so thousands lined up, drawn less by patriotism than by sheer survival instinct. You shuffle forward with the others, barefoot, on warm cobblestones, and offer your name to the man with the wax tablet. You lie about your age if you must. No one asks too many questions. So long as you can hold a sword and walk 20 miles in the sun, you're good enough for the legions. The truth hides in what the murals never show: the lice, the rot, the loneliness, the homesickness that grows thicker than your calluses, the quiet regret. But no artist ever painted that because it wouldn't inspire the next crop of volunteers. Some scholars argue that Roman propaganda was the most successful recruitment tool in ancient history. Others suggest that social pressure, not marketing, drove enlistment-shaming young men into proving their manhood on the front lines. And yet the outcome was always the same: illusions, carefully painted, and harsh truths quietly swallowed. Still, it worked. Every year, thousands signed up, stepping into a dream that would soon wear through like their sandals. By the time they discovered the difference between the promise and the post, it was far too late. It begins not with a sword, but a stick, a sharp command, and a mistake yours. You blink at the wrong time. You flinch during a formation. You misstep by a single pace. The centurion doesn't need a reason. That's lesson one. The training grounds at Capua look more like a prison yard than a school. Rows of recruits stand shoulder to shoulder, sweating under the open sky. Your tunic sticks to your back. Your breath fogs in the morning chill. Then comes the voice, run. No explanation, no goal. You run because you're told. You run until your sandals break and your knees threaten mutiny. You run, and then you drill. Repetition is the heartbeat of the Roman boot camp. You're handed a wooden sword twice as heavy as the real thing. The logic, they say, is simple. If you can fight well with this, you'll float through battle like a feather. Of course, no one feels like a feather when their arms turn to jelly before noon, or when blisters split open and refill before they can scab. The training includes something called full kit sprints. You suit up in armor, scaly metal plates, a stiff shield sandals that bite and then race across fields pockmarked with goat droppings. You must shout the Emperor's name while charging, loudly, or else. Food, once at midday, a bowl of boiled barley, maybe a strip of goat if the quartermaster's feeling generous, water from a shared skin, and after lunch, more drills, this time with real shields. Testudo formation, they bark. You drop into a squat lift the shield overhead and feel it shake as the drill master hurls stones. Not pebble stones. Miss your cue, and you get the stick. The Vetus, to be precise, carried by centurions, not just as a badge of office, but a tool for correction. Some say the best centurions broke fewer sticks because their men broke quicker. By evening, your legs tremble when you sit. Your fingers twitch. But rest. That's for civilians. Night drills await. Torches flicker as shadows lurch across the dirt. You must march in rhythm. Any deviation stick, any pause stick. Someone stumbles and vomits. Stick. Some historians debate just how harsh the training truly was. Ancient sources vary, with some exaggerating to impress and others minimizing for politics. Archaeological evidence suggests the physical demands were indeed extreme, especially compared to modern armies. But consensus is elusive. What's not debated is this boot camp was not about preparing men. It was about breaking them and rebuilding them into parts of a machine. Oddly enough, recruits who survived it often spoke with a kind of twisted pride. You'd hear it in taverns I trained at Capua. I still have the scar from my first testudo, as if enduring the brutality granted membership into an elite, suffering-bound fraternity. You lie on your cot, if lucky enough to have one, and stare at the leather ceiling of your shared tent. Outside, someone coughs. Someone weeps. You think about home. Then the whistle blows again. Your feet start to hate you before the rest of your body even wakes up. There's a sharp pinch in your left heel. A blister from yesterday's march, one of many. You wrap it with linen, knowing full well it won't help. Then you lace up your sandals, those infamous Caligie open-toed, leather strapped tight, and studded with iron hobnails. By the end of the day, those nails will press little half-moons into the meat of your soles. Marching begins with a bark. No breakfast, just orders. You're told the unit will move light, which is a lie. Your shield alone weighs more than a toddler. Add your javelin, your armor, a cooking pot, a netted satchel of dry grain, a water skin, and your personal items, perhaps a charm from home, or a carved wooden dice. Together, it adds up to 60, 70 pounds. On your back, in the heat. Then 20 miles, maybe more. You walk in tight formation along the Via Militares, those stone military roads stretching like cracked lightning across the empire. They're engineering marvels, sure. But to your feet, they're a test of endurance and friction. The sun beats down, bouncing off stone and bronze alike. Your vision swims. The world becomes a rhythm of left foot, right foot, and not collapsing. You pass vineyards, towns, ruins of old temples. You don't stop. Occasionally a scout gallops past on horseback, offering only dust in his wake. You envy him, like you've never envied anything before. That's the paradox. Horses in the Roman army weren't for infantrymen. You walk, always. If you're lucky, the centurion lets you rest midday. If not, you march straight through until camp. During the rare breaks, soldiers scrape their sandals, clean, rub their feet with oil or vinegar, and curse softly under their breath. One man pulls out a crude needle to lance a blister. Another shares a trick stuffing straw into the heel for padding, but straw runs out. Historians note that Roman footwear was effective for traction, but terrible for comfort. There's scholarly disagreement on whether soldiers were issued extra pairs or had to supply their own replacements. Some argue the caligae were symbols of identity just as much as practical gear, so you wore them proudly even when they crippled you. Sometimes the weather turns. Rain soaks the road, turning dust to sludge. The hobnails slip. You fall. Get up. Keep going. There are no exemptions, no shortcuts. Only the endless road ahead, and the ache blooming in your arches like wildfire. When evening finally arrives, you think you'll collapse. Instead, you help build the camp. Digging ditches, erecting palisades, staking tents. Rest comes hours later, if at all. And in the dark, when everyone else snores, you flex your toes and trace the sore outlines of your blisters. You wonder how many more days like this your feet can take. Then you remember tomorrow will be the same. And the day after that, a shift in posture. That's all it takes. Your shield dips an inch too low. You exhale too loudly during a hold. And before you can correct yourself, there's a crack in the air, the unmistakable whistle of a Vetus cutting through wind leather and pride. Centurions were not known for patience. They were known for sticks. Specifically, the vites, a grapevine wood rod, carried by every centurion in the Roman army. It wasn't ceremonial. It was practical, blunt, and very, very personal. In Rome, authority wasn't about raising your voice, it was about raising your stick. You watch as the centurion stalks the line. His eyes scan faces like a sculptor looking for flaws. One recruit shuffles, another blinks too long. Then the stick swings. The sound it makes on flesh is sharp but familiar. No one reacts. You don't look away. You just pretend you didn't notice. The centurion doesn't explain himself. He doesn't need to. His authority is absolute, and his beatings are less about punishment than choreography. They're reminders this is not your life anymore. It's his. The stick itself, rough polished from use, has become almost mythical in the retellings. Veterans speak of it with a mixture of fear and nostalgia. You don't forget your first Vetus, they say, chuckling through broken teeth. It could be used on anyone, for anything slouching, speaking out of turn, dropping a shield, chewing too loudly. Insubordination, absolutely, but also forgetfulness, fatigue, bad timing, wrong face. Historians still argue over the frequency and severity of corporal discipline in Roman ranks. Some sources describe near-daily beatings, while others insist that good centurions led with respect, reserving the stick only for serious infractions. Archaeological evidence offers little clarity. Bones don't record bruises. And Roman writers had a flair for drama. What we do know is this centurions were not just officers, they were gatekeepers of Roman identity. They stood between chaos and control, and the vites was their tool of enforcement. Discipline, after all, was what made the Roman legions feared. Not strength, not numbers, control. You march under his gaze like everyone else, not because you fear death, but because you fear the humiliation of being struck in front of your comrades. That sting lasts longer than any bruise. At night, you joke about him. You give him nicknames. The Vine Keeper, Old Tap Tap. Humor becomes a pressure valve, and yet you flinch when he walks past. You never quite relax, not when he's near. Some soldiers even carry their own makeshift veets during downtime, as if mimicking power might grant a fraction of it. You see one recruit pretend to discipline his friend, both of them laughing nervously. It's a game, but not really. There's a strange comfort in knowing the rules. Even if those rules are enforced with wood and bruises, you adapt, you adjust, you survive by learning not how to fight, but how to avoid attention. That's the real training. And so you sleep one ear open, one eye twitching, wondering if tomorrow it will be your turn to feel the stick. The promise was simple: serve Rome and you'll be paid. The reality, that depends on your definition of paid. You don't receive gold coins in neat leather pouches. You don't get to spend your wages freely at every market stall. Instead, you receive salt. Sometimes. And if not salt, then sacks of grain, hunks of cheese or vinegar so sour it makes your teeth hum. That's not a joke. Roman soldiers were literally compensated in commodities. The Latin word salarium, the root of salary, comes from sal or salt. It wasn't just a flavoring, it was currency. Especially in regions where coinage was scarce or too valuable to circulate freely, salt served as both paycheck and preservative. You squat on a crate beside your comrades, counting rations like a miser. You've been told the next batch of salted pork is due soon. That was 5 days ago. One man tries to trade his vinegar for dried dates. Another offers his barley mash in exchange for a spare needle and thread. The army, you learn, is a barter economy wrapped in bureaucracy. You spend as much time worrying about your pay as you do marching. There are rumors swirling that the quartermaster is skimming, that the grain has gone moldy in the storehouse, that the legatus himself is withholding payments until the campaign ends. None of it is confirmed. All of it feels true. When soldiers go too long without proper compensation, things start to unravel. Whispers of mutiny rustle through the tents. Not loud ones, not organized. Just little complaints grumbled during shield maintenance, muttered during latrine duty. Why should we build their roads if we can't even afford a loaf? Ancient records do confirm multiple episodes of pay-related mutinies, especially when campaigns dragged on or promises of land weren't fulfilled. Some scholars believe these revolts were the most frequent form of insubordination in the Roman military, not cowardice or desertion, but protests over missed rations. Others argue the real issue was inflation. By the late empire, coinage was so debased that even when soldiers were paid, it wasn't worth much. Today, your ration is stale bread and a measure of dried lentils. The salt. It arrived yesterday, but only half of what was promised. The centurion shrugs. It's war, he says. Be glad you get anything. You don't argue, you just chew. Slowly. Later, you hear that a man in the next tent over tried to bribe a clerk for extra rations. He got caught. The punishment, not death, but reduction. His share was cut in half. For a month. That's worse than a beating. Hunger gnaws more quietly, but longer. And yet there's a strange ritual to it. Soldiers line up day after day, hands outstretched like beggars at a feast they built themselves. Some joke, some sulk, some just stare. Over time, you stop thinking of it as unfair. You start thinking of it as normal. You chew your salted pork in silence, each bite a reminder that Rome doesn't pay in gratitude. It pays in salt. When dusk falls, you don't head to a tavern. You don't recline on a cushion with a goblet of wine or flirt with a merchant's daughter. No, your night begins with canvas and ends in mud. Your home on campaign is a leather tent, the Papilio Latin for butterfly, though there's nothing delicate about it. 8 men share one tent. You learn their smells before their names. Sweat mildew, unwashed wool, and something vaguely sour. Maybe the cheese, maybe the feet, maybe both. The tent is made from overlapping goatskins, oiled and dark stretched over wooden poles that wobble if the wind's too strong. You sleep packed in like olives, in brine, sardined on a straw mat, cloaks doubling as blankets. The first time you crawl inside, it feels like a prank. There's barely space to lie flat, let alone stretch. One man snores like thunder. Another talks in his sleep. A third grinds his teeth with such intensity that someone finally throws a sandal at him. No one complains seriously, though, because the alternative is worse sleeping outside exposed to rain insects or curious dogs. Each soldier is assigned a contubernum, a squad of 8, who cook march sleep and fight side by side. It's part tent, part tribe. You bicker like siblings ration bread, like misers, and develop an unspoken rhythm for who gets which corner. The smallest man curls near the flap. The snorer somehow always ends up in the middle. There's no privacy, of course. Bodily noises are part of the chorus. So are whispered regrets and quiet prayers. Some men clutch amulets from home. Others carve tally marks into tent poles counting days, not victories. At least one guy keeps a small doll under his tunic, no one asks why. Roman camps were marvels of organization, straight roads, grid layouts, and identical tents lined in precision rows. Archaeologists note that even temporary camps left lasting impressions on the earth thanks to the uniform spacing and drainage ditches. But within those tidy lines, chaos, sweat, and snoring. Scholars still debate how often tents were replaced or cleaned. Some argue that leather rotted quickly in wet climates, forcing frequent repairs. Others suggest that soldiers patched their tents endlessly with twine pitch and curses. Regardless, mold was common, especially in Britannia or Germania, where rain seemed to seep through reality itself. Tonight the tent leaks. A soft plop lands on your cheek. You groan, wipe it away, and shift. But there's nowhere dry. Your foot nudges someone's back. They grunt. You mumble an apology. Still, there's a strange intimacy to it. Camaraderie built not through triumphs, but through shared discomfort. You learn your tent mates' rhythms, the scratch of their beards, the weight of their sighs. You even miss them on solo assignments. Eventually, exhaustion overrules annoyance. The tent grows quiet except for the wind rustling the flap. You curl into your corner cloak, pulled tight sandals tucked under your head like a pillow. Sleep doesn't come quickly, but it does come. And tomorrow, the tent will pack down into a bundle of stink straps and memories. You smell it before you see it, smoke from a sputtering fire and something burnt. Not wood, not flesh. Barley. Again. The army's idea of a meal isn't a feast, it's fuel. You kneel by the campfire with a tin pot in hand, watching your dinner turn from beige to black around the edges. Roman army food wasn't about variety. It was about survival. A soldier's standard ration was grain, mostly wheat or barley, which he was expected to grind, knead, and cook himself. The result? Pulls a thick, tasteless porridge you could eat hot cold or scraped off the bottom of your sandal. On better days, you might get lentils. On rare days, meat. And on truly special occasions, cheese that doesn't make you gag. You stir your pot with a stick. The man beside you tries to roast a beetle for extra crunch. Another has managed to snare a pigeon everyone watches like it's a stage play. He plucks it, spits on the feathers, then drops it whole into a pot. Extra flavor, he mutters. No one argues. The military issued some rations, yes. But most of the cooking burden fell on the soldiers. There were no camp chefs. If you wanted a hot meal, you made it yourself after marching 20 miles building a camp and digging latrines. Burnt dinner wasn't a failure. It was the norm. Some units shared the task. One man ground the grain, another tended the fire, another collected water. But cooperation depended on morale, and hunger often frayed that. Arguments flared over burnt pots and missing oil. You used all the salt. That's my barley, who stole my ladle. Silence usually followed until the next flare-up. Historians estimate that a Roman soldier consumed roughly 3,500 calories a day, mostly from carbs. But accounts of malnutrition weren't rare, especially during long campaigns or bad harvest years. Some scholars suggest the official rations were idealized versions on paper. Everyone ate well. In practice, you boiled what you had and hoped for the best. Tonight, your pulse is scorched. You scrape it from the pot anyway. Bits of char cling to the bottom like barnacles. You chew slowly, trying not to grimace. It tastes like smoke and regret. Across the fire, someone adds vinegar to his. Cuts the bland, he says. It mostly cuts your tongue. Occasionally, merchants followed the army selling spices, sausages, or exotic sauces if you had coin. Most didn't. Some stole from local farms, risking lashes or worse. A few got creative grinding acorns into flour or frying weeds in oil. Innovation born from desperation. You once heard a veteran say, "A good cook is more valuable than a good sword." He wasn't joking. The fastest way to break a soldier's spirit wasn't in battle. It was through the stomach. Later, you scrub your pot with sand and spit. You stash it under your cloak, hoping the rats won't find it. Your stomach growls. You consider chewing a strip of leather. Again. Somehow, you fall asleep, thinking not about battle, but bread. You imagine glory swords, clashing enemies, falling cheers rising like thunder. But most days, it's just rocks, mud, and waiting. You spend more time building things than breaking them. Welcome to the long, dull heartbeat of Roman military life boredom, punctuated by the occasional scream. Today you're digging. Again. A fort wall must be reinforced. The ditch needs deepening. There's a pile of timber to move from point A to point B, back-breaking work without glory. The sun crawls overhead while your shovel thuds rhythmically into stubborn soil. Sweat runs into your eyes. Your only reward? A slightly straighter wall. And when you're not building, you're guarding. One shift at the gate, one along the outer perimeter, another pacing the camp's edge by torchlight. You scan shadows, listen for rustling. Most of the time, it's nothing. A fox, a breeze, your own imagination. The problem isn't fear, it's sameness. Days blend. The work never ends, but it never changes. You begin to mark time by blisters old ones, healing new ones blooming. Every now and then, someone yells, "Barbarians." Everyone bolts upright, heart pounding. But it's rarely an attack. Usually just wild animals, a drunk comrade, or some poor shepherd who wandered too close. Still you crave those moments of adrenaline because anything is better than another hour sorting nails. You find ways to pass the time. Some men gamble with carved bone dice. Others whittle spoons or attempt crude poetry. There's always someone humming a half-forgotten tune from home. The same man insists on telling the same joke every evening. No one laughs anymore, but no one asks him to stop. And then there are letters. If you're literate, you write. If not, you dictate. A scribbling tentmate transcribes your words, usually about food, health money owed. Sometimes you just make things up. I saw the sea today, you lie. It was green and beautiful. You haven't seen the sea in months. Historians note that only a small percentage of Roman soldiers ever saw active battle. The majority of their service involved labor construction and patrol. Some scholars argue this daily grind was Rome's secret weapon, its ability to maintain order without constant fighting. Others suggest that the boredom itself was a form of control, keeping men too exhausted to rebel. Still, the monotony wears at you. Nights stretch, days shrink. You begin dreaming of things you used to find boring: market noise, a crowded tavern, even your cousin's endless complaints about wheat prices. You'd give anything for a pointless argument over olives. And then one evening, a horn blares. Real this time. You grab your helmet, heart stuttering. Maybe it's happening combat finally. But the alarm ends abruptly. A boar wandered into the outer ditch. The centurion skewered it. Cheers erupt not for victory, but for dinner. You eat boar that night. It's tough and smoky. You chew slowly, savoring the distraction. Someone tells the same joke. This time you laugh. Not because it's funny, but because it's not a rock or a shovel or a wall. There's a sharp metal hiss, then a dull thud. You don't see the wound, just the aftermath. A man limps past, with blood seeping through his greave, his face pale and lips pressed tight. He doesn't scream. Roman soldiers learn not to, not because they're brave, but because it doesn't help. Injuries come often, and not just from battle. You're more likely to hurt yourself with a spade than a sword. A twisted ankle from uneven ground, a split palm from lifting stone, a crushed toe from a dropped helmet. One man loses half a finger to a door hinge. Another gets burned while boiling vinegar. You might expect a field hospital. And yes, there is one if you're lucky. But don't imagine white linens and polished instruments. Picture instead a shaded tent smelling of old blood and soured wine. The medicus isn't a doctor in the modern sense. He's a mix of butcher-barber and herbalist, armed with bone saws, bronze forceps, and some truly alarming optimism. Your treatment begins with wine, not to celebrate survival, but as anesthesia. It doesn't numb the pain. It just makes you too woozy to punch the medic. You bite on a stick while he digs a sliver of iron from your thigh. There's no stitching, just cauterization. Smoke rises. You taste iron in your mouth, though you're not bleeding there. Some soldiers refuse treatment. They'd rather risk infection than endure the medic's care. Others carry their own healing charms, small tin amulets, tokens of Asclepius' prayers etched on bone. Whether they help is debatable, but they give comfort. That's enough. Historians note that Roman military medicine was surprisingly advanced for its time-wound irrigation surgical tools, even organized triage. Yet records also describe horrors men left to rot, amputations done with dull knives, unsanitary conditions that spread disease faster than battle ever could. Scholars still debate whether legionary care was better or worse than what civilians received. You once saw a man with a spear wound in his shoulder. He joked that he could now scratch his own back with it. You laughed until he coughed and blood flecked his chin. He died 2 nights later. No one mentioned it. The cot was reused. Injuries don't always come from outside. Your own body can turn traitor. Toothaches become face-swelling infections. Blisters become ulcers. A minor cut festers into something purple and foul. There are no antibiotics, only poultices, hot knives, and prayer. Still, some men survived the worst. You hear stories of a centurion who lost an eye and kept fighting, of a standard bearer with a shattered knee who trained himself to march again. These tales are whispered around fires, half truth and half hope, because everyone wants to believe that survival is possible even when the odds say otherwise. Tonight, your comrade has a fever. He sweats and shivers, muttering in his sleep. You press a damp cloth to his brow. That's all you can do. The medicus shrugs. Give it time, he says. Time in the Roman army is the most expensive medicine of all. The tent is one man short tonight. His blanket lies folded. His mess tin sits untouched. No one says his name aloud, but everyone knows he ran. Desertion in the Roman army wasn't rare. It was just rarely spoken of. You hear the stories in whispers, men slipping away during night watch, vanishing while gathering firewood, or bribing locals to smuggle them out disguised as traitors. The boldest even forged discharge papers. Most weren't so lucky. You lie awake, heart thudding. You knew him. Not well, but enough to share salt and jokes. He hated marching, had a crooked toe, always talked about his mother's fig trees. And now he's a ghost. Not dead, just erased. His name scratched from the tablet. His belongings divided among the rest of the squad. A quiet warning wrapped in silence. The Roman military didn't take kindly to quitting. Punishment for desertion ranged from flogging to death, depending on the mood of the commander and the politics of the hour. Sometimes deserters were made examples of public beatings, paraded in shame, even stoned by their own comrades. More often, they simply disappeared. The punishment wasn't always about what happened to the deserter. It was about the fear it planted in those who remained. There are rumors of whole units punished for one man's escape. The dreaded decimatio, where every 10th soldier is executed as punishment for the cowardice of a few. Historians debate how often this truly occurred. Some argue it was rare and ritualized, more legend than practice. Others suggest commanders used it whenever morale wavered. Archaeological evidence is scarce, but oral histories persist, passed down like ghost stories whispered in the dark. You wonder where he is now. If he made it past the scouts. If he's hiding in the forest, shivering under leaves, and praying the hounds don't catch his scent. Some deserters were never found. Others were captured weeks later, half-starved and weeping, dragged back in chains. A few just vanished, started new lives under new names, married, farmed, lived, or so the rumors say. You cling to that version. It feels kinder. The officers don't address the missing man. Instead, the centurion lines you up and stares each of you down. You think about leaving, he says, and I'll make sure you regret staying. No stick this time. Just words heavier than any blow. Desertion doesn't always start with fear. Sometimes it's hunger, or homesickness, or sheer exhaustion. A man calculates the risk 10 days' march from the coast, 2 days' rations in his sack, one moonless night. And then he tries. Most fail. A few don't. You stare at the stars, counting them like grains of salt. You think about your feet, your belly, your heart. You think about home. And then you roll over and sleep. Because tomorrow, you march again. And though no one will ever say his name again, you remember it. Quietly. Just in case you hear it whispered someday, from a safe distance across a fence lined with fig trees. You wake to the sound of dripping, not rain against the tent roof through it, a slow, cold seep trailing down the back of your neck, finding the one patch of skin you didn't cover. You groan shift and feel the soggy weight of your blanket. Another wet morning in the Roman army. Rain is not your enemy, not officially, but it's the enemy of your gear, your morale, and your patience. The moment weather turns, everything changes. Tents leak, roads vanish under mud, fires refuse to light, leather cracks, and worst of all, your armor begins to rust. Roman soldiers wore a variety of armor styles, from overlapping iron plates, lorica segmentata, to chainmail, lorica hamata. All of it hated water. A single night in the rain could undo days of polishing. And so every time the sky grumbled, the camp grumbled back. You crawl out of the tent into ankle-deep sludge. Your sandals squelch with every step. Somewhere someone's cursing in 3 dialects while trying to dry their cloak over a smoking pile of kindling. Another man dangles his soaked tunic on a spear point, hoping the wind will do what the fire can't. You spend hours oiling your gear. Armor shield, rim sword hilt. The oil stinks, part tallow, part vinegar, but it's the only thing keeping rust at bay. You scrub with sand and wool rags. The grit bites your knuckles. The rust bites back. Historians acknowledge how heavily weather impacted Roman military logistics. Flooded rivers, washed out bridges, soaked supply lines, all could cripple a campaign. And though Rome engineered aqueducts and roads, it never conquered the sky. Some scholars believe the army's obsession with standardization gear, routines, even tent dimensions, was partly a defense against unpredictable climates. But standard tents didn't keep you dry. The leather, once supple, stiffens when soaked. The seams gape. The floor becomes a puddle. You learn to build drainage ditches with military precision. Every camp looks like a muddy maze, crisscrossed with shallow trenches designed to trick water into flowing away, ideally somewhere that isn't your sleeping mat. Then there's the cold. Not battlefield cold, miserable cold. The kind that seeps into joints and doesn't leave. Your fingers grow numb fumble buckles. Your teeth chatter while standing guard, half hoping the enemy shows up just to warm things up with a bit of action. And in that damp illness spreads, coughs, fevers, rashes. A sniffle turns into bronchitis before anyone bothers to report it. The medicus prescribes garlic. Always garlic. You wonder if he's a physician or just really, really fond of garlic. Some men go strange in the rain. They start muttering. They stop caring. One refuses to wear his greaves, insists they're cursed. Another buries his wet boots, claiming they betrayed him. You laugh quietly, kindly, because part of you understands. Tonight, your tent mate builds a tiny roof inside the tent from his cloak and a stick. It's useless, but you thank him anyway. The gesture feels dry at least, and outside, the rain keeps falling. Like time, like rust. There's a dog in the camp again. Small, scruffy, and terribly undisciplined. She answers to no name, steals bits of barley mash, and sleeps wherever she pleases, including your shield. No one dares chase her off. She belongs to the 3rd cohort, or maybe she owns them. Animals in the Roman army weren't just mascots, they were morale. Between marching, digging, and bleeding soldiers clung to any fragment of comfort. Some found it in lucky charms, others in muttered prayers, but many, they found it in fur feathers or claws. Officially, every legion marched under an eagle standard, aquila, sacred, and shining. It represented Rome's soul, guarded by elite bearers who'd rather die than lose it. But unofficially, many cohorts adopted their own emblems: boars, bulls, wolves. Some carried carved tokens, others traveled with the real thing. The most famous, the elephant of Legio III Cyrenaica. Not a metaphor, An actual elephant marched across provinces painted with red swirls. The beast reportedly lifted its trunk whenever trumpets sounded. Whether that's true or a soldier's drunken boast, no one knows. But the story lives. In your camp, it's mostly dogs. They wander freely, napping under wagons or following their favorite soldier like shadows. One guards the armory. Another has learned to beg by flopping dramatically at mealtime. And when tempers flare or bad news spreads, those dogs sense it. They curl close. They nuzzle hands. Some cohorts keep birds. A raven that mimics the centurion's curses. A pigeon trained to land only on one man's helmet. Harmless nonsense, maybe. But in a world of harsh rules, small absurdities matter. Scholars argue over the extent of animal presence in Roman military life. While literary sources mention mascots sporadically, archaeological evidence, bones found in camps, depictions on tombstones suggests a deeper bond. Still records are sparse, and much is reconstructed from lore and soldiers' graffiti. Tonight, as you oil your gear, the scruffy dog climbs onto your lap. You don't invite her. She simply arrives. Her fur is damp, her paws muddy. She smells faintly of soup, and yet her weight grounds you. Your fingers scratch behind her ear. She sighs like a weary soldier. You recall a story, maybe true, maybe not, about a legion that refused to march until their goat mascot returned. They delayed departure by a full day. No one was punished. The goat was found chewing parchment behind the latrines. Everyone cheered. It's these moments, small and strange, that keep the machine from breaking. You've seen men hold it together through frostbite and fever until their pet mouse died. You've watched a hardened veteran weep when a dove refused to leave his shoulder. Your tent mate grumbles as the dog curls between you. She'll steal your bread, he warns. You nod. She probably will. You don't care. Because in this army, loyalty is rarely rewarded. Orders change, officers lie, coins fail to arrive. But the dog always returns. And tonight, with her warm body against your leg, the rain feels a little less sharp. The day they hand you your discharge papers, you don't feel free. You feel empty. No trumpet sounds. No parade. Just a scribbled tablet, a nod from the clerk, and a final march, this time away from the army, not with it. You were promised land. That's the deal. Serve Rome, and upon retirement, you'll receive a plot to farm. Somewhere fertile, somewhere warm. But when you arrive, you find rocky soil, overgrown weeds, and neighbors who aren't thrilled by the sight of a scarred stranger claiming a hillside. Some veterans are luckier. They're settled in colonies, mini Romes sprinkled across the empire, built to reward old soldiers and spread Roman culture. The theory is tidy, the practice less so. Bureaucrats bungle paperwork. Locals resist. Supplies run out. Your reward quickly turns into a second career in improvisational survival. Others never make it to the land. They sell their allotments often for far less than they're worth, just to afford a cart, a mule, or a roof over their heads. Some drift from town to town wearing their military belts as badges of honor, hoping the site earns a discount at taverns. It usually doesn't. There are pensions, technically, but they're inconsistent. One year you might receive a tidy payout. The next, nothing arrives. Inflation eats your coin faster than hunger ever did. You consider re-enlisting not out of loyalty, but out of desperation. Historians agree that the veteran experience in Rome was wildly uneven. Some were celebrated, granted positions of influence in local councils. Others died in poverty, buried in unmarked graves. Scholarly debate continues about whether the state failed its veterans or simply operated under brutal honesty, your reward is surviving. And then there's the loneliness. For years you slept shoulder to shoulder with men who knew your cough, your snore, your secrets. Now silence echoes. Civilians look at you like a curiosity. You speak in formation metaphors they don't understand. You wake at dawn, even though no one asks you to. You still oil your boots. One former comrade runs a bathhouse. Another cobbles shoes. A third has vanished entirely. Rumors say he joined a bandit crew in the hills. You attend his funeral twice. Both times it turns out he's alive. Eventually you stop asking. Sometimes you gather at the Veterans Tavern. The food's bad. The ale's worse. But the company familiar. You swap stories, some true, most improved. You argue over who had the worst centurion, the dumbest assignment, the strangest pet. You laugh too loudly. No one else in town joins in. Tonight, you sit by your hearth, sipping thin wine. Your knees ache. A storm rattles the shutters. And you find yourself polishing your helmet not because it needs it, but because your hands remember how. You're not a soldier anymore. But in your bones, the army lingers. In scars, in posture, in dreams, where you're marching, still always marching. Not toward war, not toward Rome, just toward something that feels like home and never quite arrives. You've seen the worst of it: mud in your teeth, fear in your gut, a tent mate dying with your name on his lips. And yet, you stayed. Why, it's not because of glory. That vanished long ago, somewhere between your first blister and your last boiled barley. It's not loyalty either, not really. You've seen commanders lie, centurions steal, and tribunes vanish the moment things got difficult. But still, you stayed. Maybe it's fear. Fear of the unknown, of what comes next. The army gives you a schedule, a ration, a role. Outside of it, chaos. Civilians blink at you like you're a stray animal. You speak of formations. They speak of fish prices. In the army, even if things were bad, at least they made sense. Or maybe it's inertia. You marched yesterday, so you'll march today. The body continues, because it's easier than stopping. Your boots know the road better than they know stillness. Habits harden into identity. Some men stayed because they believed. Not in Rome exactly, but in the idea of order, of something bigger than themselves. A cause, however flawed. You recall one comrade who said, "I may not love Rome, but I hate chaos more." He died defending a supply cart. Others had no choice. Debt chains tighter than iron. Families reliant on their small stipend, or no family at all, just the army. A moving fortress of camaraderie, where the only real cost of belonging was exhaustion and the occasional lash. Historians often puzzle over retention rates. Why did so many men re-enlist after brutal campaigns, horrific winters, or humiliating defeats? Some scholars blame the economy. Roman civilian life offered little opportunity for poor men. Others point to the bonds formed through shared suffering, forged stronger than any chainmail. There's also the matter of reputation. Outside the army, you're nobody. Inside, you're a veteran. A miles. You know things: how to pace a march, clean a wound, build a camp before nightfall. You've earned nods from centurions. You've shouted into storms. You've survived. That counts for something. And yes, there were perks. Promotions. Better gear. A share in spoils when there were any. Occasional land grants or extra wine rations. And always the promise that after this next campaign, then you can rest. It's a cruel hope, but hope nonetheless. One night, your tent mate asks if you regret staying. You think about it. About the blisters, the beatings, the boredom. About friends lost and years blurred by dust and repetition. You shrug. There was nowhere else, you say. But later alone, you wonder if that's true. Maybe there was somewhere else. Maybe you just stopped looking. Or maybe deep down part of you didn't want to leave, not really. Because in the end, the army wasn't just punishment. It was rhythm, purpose, a terrible kind of home. You roll over on your mat, adjust your cloak, and close your eyes. Tomorrow, the trumpet will sound. You'll rise. You'll march. And somehow, that will feel like enough. You've seen the films, the noble Roman soldier, with a jaw carved from marble armor that never dents, and a perfectly timed death that inspires nations. That version of history sparkles on screen. It's grand, poetic, clean. But you know better. The real army didn't march in slow motion. It trudged. It limped. Its shields cracked. Its sandals slipped. And its soldiers coughed through sleepless nights in soaked tents. There was no dramatic lighting in the latrines. No orchestral score while scraping mold off bread. Just the steady, unspectacular rhythm of survival. You think back to the first time you saw a legion in a mosaic, shining helmets, majestic standards, horses prancing. None of those tiles captured the stench, the fleas, the endless waiting. No artist painted the blister on your heel or the way your shield strap cut into your shoulder until it bled. And yet people believe the movie version, the polished epic vision of Roman military life sells better. Even you once believed it before your first 20-mile march with a fever, before your first night in the mud, before your first friend died, not from battle, but from a bad boil and a worse medic. Scholars often discuss how modern media shapes our view of ancient warfare. Some argue that romanticizing the past is inevitable. People want heroes. Others worry it flattens the human experience, erasing the real struggles in favor of spectacle. There's truth in both. But neither version prepares you for the smell of wet leather, or the sound of a man quietly crying over a lost letter from home. You've laughed through lice infestations. You've buried comrades with no eulogy but a shared glance. You've learned that courage is quieter than the epics suggest. It's not about charging forward, but getting up one more day when your feet say no and your heart says, don't bother. And still, if someone asked you to describe your service, you might pause. Not because you lack words, but because the truth sounds strange. It was awful. It was monotonous. It was somehow everything. The movies forget that you spent more time stacking logs than swinging swords, that you feared boredom more than enemies, that your proudest moment wasn't on a battlefield, but the day you fixed a broken tent pole before the storm hit. You stand now at the edge of the camp, watching the torches flicker in the wind. The standard flaps lazily above the gate, more cloth than glory. A dog curls near your feet. A tent mate snores softly inside. And the stars, those same ones that watched over Julius Caesar, blink without judgment. You don't regret serving, not because it was noble, but because it was real. And sometimes, realness is the only reward you get. So the next time someone marvels at the cinematic glory of Rome, you'll smile. Let them believe it. You've lived the version no one dares film. And that's its own kind of legend. But while the battles faded, another truth lingered in the quiet corners of camp. The sound of coins being counted behind canvas flaps, of hushed trades, and side deals that kept the soldiers afloat. You trail behind a patrol as it trudges through the outer edges of Gaul, their shields bouncing slightly against sunburnt shoulders. Their faces are not etched with glory, but boredom. A few mutter about dinner. One peels off to knock on a merchant's door not for orders, but to drop off 3 pairs of boots he's quietly repaired for coin. Roman soldiers were not salaried in the way you might expect. Their pay stipendium was often delayed or siphoned through deductions. Equipment fees, food rations, and contributions to commanders meant that what little they earned, they often never saw. So they improvised. The camp, you learn, is not just a military base, it's a marketplace. Behind the standard issue tents are secret stashes of wares, firewood bundles sold at a markup, wine diluted, and resold little carved charms offered for luck. The same soldier who drilled formations at dawn might spend twilight squatting beside a brazier, shaping bronze buckles to sell at the next town. Quirky details emerge the longer you linger. One centurion makes a tidy profit, selling ink and papyrus to his own men at inflated prices. Another smuggles dyed tunics and exotic spices acquired during campaigns in Egypt. These hustles weren't just tolerated, they were survival. There's no scholarly consensus on how widespread these activities were, but surviving graffiti pay records and stray court complaints suggest the side economy of the Roman legions was thriving, if quietly. It was a world of favors, traded in whispers, and coin passed in calloused palms. And while generals planned battles and glory, the soldiers beneath them planned how to afford breakfast. The heat from the forge hugs your face as you step into a hidden alcove tucked behind the barracks. Sparks fly in quiet bursts, while a hunched figure hammers away his helmet, tossed aside and sleeves rolled up. This isn't official army business. This is the unofficial blacksmith of the third cohort, pounding out horseshoes, belt clasps, and the occasional bronze hairpin, all under the steady rhythm of economic necessity. Many Roman soldiers, particularly those with past lives as artisans or laborers, transformed their off-duty hours into cottage industries. The army provided tools for war, but not always for life. And so, out came the anvils and bellows, often smuggled or self-made. In corners of camps or borrowed spaces in nearby villages, these bootleg blacksmiths fired up tiny furnaces and practiced their craft, half hidden and always alert to the threat of being caught doing something technically not illegal, but certainly frowned upon. These weren't just crude tools. Some soldiers created beautiful, intricate works, belt fasteners shaped like eagles' brooches adorned with mythological creatures, or tiny statuettes gifted to sweethearts back home. They sold these items to fellow soldiers, to civilians in garrison towns, or sometimes even to their superiors. A well-made hinge could fetch more than a week's pay. A decorative dagger that might cover your gambling debts and dinner. One peculiar account describes a legionary stationed in Britannia who became known for forging miniature amphorae tiny vessels used as lucky charms by other troops. Historians still argue whether these were genuine tokens of protection or just a clever way to repurpose leftover metal. Either way, his side gig eventually earned him enough to retire early purchase land and, ironically, hire others to do the smithing. There was risk, of course. The Roman military prided itself on discipline and unity. Too much entrepreneurial flair could be seen as a distraction, or worse, a sign of disloyalty. But as long as swords were sharp and drills ran on time, many officers looked the other way. After all, even a centurion might need a hinge fixed, or a gift for his mistress. Some scholars remain puzzled by the sheer variety of blacksmithing that flourished within the camps. Was it tolerated due to necessity, or because it kept idle hands busy? The answer, like many things in Roman history, is lost in layers of practical silence and cultural contradiction. The forge cools slowly as your host carefully wraps a finished trinket in cloth. He glances over his shoulder, not with guilt, but with caution. Out here, a second life smolders beneath the Empire's rigid surface, lit by the quiet glow of molten metal, and kept alive by hands too skilled and too broke to do nothing. A damp breeze tugs at your cloak as you pass rows of soggy tunics hung on rough ropes, dripping into the worn earth of the camp's edge. The sour tang of lye and foot sweat lingers in the air, hardly the aroma of glory. Welcome to the makeshift laundromat of Legion 9, where soldiers scrub grime not out of duty, but desperation. It might sound absurd, elite Roman troops bending over wash basins. But the truth is, cleanliness came at a price, one that not every legionary wanted to pay in sweat. Enter the entrepreneurial few who realized there was coin to be made in suds and elbow grease. For a handful of denarii, a man could outsource his laundry to a fellow soldier willing to haul water-grind soapstone and beat tunics against smooth river rocks. One centurion became infamous for this. His name is lost, but his hustle wasn't. Known simply as the washer, he charged premium rates for spotless garments and returned them folded with eerie precision. His pitch clean cloth, clean conscience. Some say he even scented the tunics with crushed lavender when he could get it. That's brand loyalty Roman style. The tools of the trade were basic, but effective urine collected for ammonia chalk to absorb oil stains, wooden paddles for beating, and sun for bleaching. It's a grimy, wet business, but one that kept many soldiers' coin pouches clinking. And in a world where appearance mattered from battlefield parades to brothel visits, fresh clothing was a silent currency. Of course, not everyone approved. Officers frowned on anything that disrupted training schedules or suggested social inequality within the ranks. Still, no clear law forbade it. Some scholars continue to debate whether these laundrymen blurred the line between camaraderie and commerce. Were they entrepreneurs or just exploiting laziness? Records are sparse, but graffiti in a barracks wall scrawled, "Give Marcus your pants," and they return as clouds. A boast, a review. Maybe both. What's clear is that the laundering sideline spread through legions like gossip through a mess hall. One rainy evening, you watch a soldier wring out a tunic beside a fire hands, red and raw, muttering numbers under his breath. He's not calculating battle formations, he's counting clients. 10 tunics today, 12 tomorrow. Maybe more after the next march. If he plays it right, he might afford a better cot. Maybe even save up for his discharge fee. It's not glorious, but it's a plan. The fire crackles as he drapes the last damp cloth over a rope, then wraps his own cloak tighter against the wind. His face is lined with weariness, but his fingers twitch like they're already measuring another garment. In the Empire's great machinery of conquest, even washing clothes could be a path to survival and profit. You're startled by a sudden bleat, sharp and unexpected from behind a tent flap. A soldier peeks out, grinning sheepishly, then disappears back inside. Moments later, you spot the unmistakable curve of a beak poking from a wicker cage. No, this isn't a petting zoo. It's a military outpost, doubling as a black market menagerie. Roman soldiers, especially those stationed near trade routes or remote frontiers, found opportunities beyond blades and shields. One such opportunity animals. From colorful birds in Numidia to nimble goats and Gaul troops, began capturing breeding and selling creatures as side income. Exotic species fetched high prices in Roman cities, where wealthy families wanted rare pets to impress guests or fill private menageries. The trade wasn't always legal. Transporting wild animals across provinces without permits could get you flogged or fined depending on the governor. But enforcement was patchy and profits were tempting. A soldier in Syria might smuggle a monkey home in a supply cart. Another in Hispania might trade falcons with local tribes, who in turn bartered pelts or honey in exchange. One curious record describes a trio of legionaries who ran a mobile zoo cart between camps in Dacia. They charged a fee to glimpse a pair of chameleons and a red-crested rooster they claimed could predict weather. Some historians remain skeptical of the story's accuracy, citing its appearance in a tavern ledger rather than an official account. Still, the idea persists because it's just weird enough to be true. Beyond showmanship, some animal traders leaned into utility. Soldiers sold mules to merchants' sheep, to villagers, even dogs to fellow troops. One man, known only as Aurelius the Biter, supposedly trained feral dogs as camp guards. He charged a premium for half-trained, mostly obedient beasts. Anecdotes suggest one of his dogs once saluted a tribune, whether by design or accident, no one agrees. Scholars continue to debate the scale of these operations. Were they isolated hustles or parts of informal supply chains? Whatever the answer, the empire's military roads helped turn provincial fauna into commodities with soldiers as middlemen in armor. As you walk past another tent, a soldier tosses feed into a pen where 3 plump geese waddle indignantly. He whistles tunelessly, tossing a wink your way. Food or fortune, he murmurs. You're not sure which he means, and he doesn't explain. In this quiet corner of empire livestock and legions blend into one fluid economy where survival means thinking beyond swords. The sun dips lower, casting the cages and pens into long shadows. Somewhere nearby, a bird calls out a cry foreign to this region. A reminder that even here, in a Roman camp, surrounded by scrub and silence, the world is moving in every direction. And sometimes it squawks. The first notes drift out like whispers, soft, tentative, and strangely sweet against the backdrop of clinking armor and distant hooves. Beneath a sloping canvas near the campfire, you find the source, a soldier hunched over a curved wooden horn, eyes closed fingers, tapping time on the leather strap of his greaves. He plays not for orders, but for coins. This, it turns out, is a moonlighting musician. Though most Roman troops were expected to know a few basic calls, signals for attack, retreat, and formation shifts, some soldiers went far beyond utility. They brought instruments with them, from home lyres carved from olive wood bone flutes, stringed citheras wrapped carefully in linen. And when evenings fell quiet, they played. In some camps, music became a soft economy. A talented performer might earn a handful of denarii for a private concert. Others took up gigs in nearby taverns, on leave, earning free wine and warm meals in exchange for lullabies or raucous drinking songs. The best even composed ballads, commemorating skirmishes, or poking fun at their commanders subtly, of course. One legionary, known from a scratched inscription as Felix the Lungs, gained notoriety in Germania for performing bawdy versions of Virgil's verses. Supposedly, his impersonation of Julius Caesar, speaking in rhyme, caused a riot of laughter that nearly earned him a flogging. Historians disagree on whether Felix was punished or promoted, but his name appears again, later this time, as a centurion. Maybe talent did pay. Not all performances were humorous. Some soldiers played mournful melodies from their homelands, songs that curled gently into the night like incense. A tune from a Syrian flute, a Thracian war ballad turned lullaby. In these sounds, far from home, the Legion found fragments of belonging and occasionally someone worth tipping. Of course, not everyone appreciated the serenades. One Roman general, irritated by off-duty noise, supposedly banned all stringed instruments from his camps. The rule didn't last long. As some scholars put it, where discipline failed, the lyre endured. You watch as a young recruit shyly approaches the horn player and drops a coin onto his blanket. He doesn't speak, just nods, then sits nearby, listening. The tune shifts subtle and slow. Maybe it's a folk song, maybe something made up on the spot. But in that moment, the war, the dust, the missing pay, it all drifts into the background. Later, as firelight flickers on the soldier's face, he opens his eyes and notices you. He grins faintly, like someone caught dreaming. Not all battles need shouting, he says, then returns to his horn, letting the notes swell into something like memory. In the Roman army, even silence had a price, and some learned to sell sound. You pause outside a cramped tent, where soft candlelight flickers through a stitched flap. Inside, two soldiers lean over a wax tablet, while a third murmurs something slowly, eyes closed in concentration. The writer squints, then scratches a line, tilting his head as if composing poetry. But this isn't verse for the Senate. It's a love letter for hire. Literacy wasn't universal in the Roman legions. While higher-ranking officers often read and wrote fluently, many foot soldiers came from rural backgrounds where letters were as foreign as scrolls from Alexandria. But longing for home for sweethearts, for someone to remember you, was universal. And so emerged the ghostwriters of ancient romance. These scribes for rent, often soldiers with a flair for rhetoric, offered their quills and wax styluses to those struggling to turn feelings into form. For a few coins or favors, they would craft affectionate oaths, dramatic declarations, or coded messages that could slip past watchful parents. Sometimes, they even mimicked earlier letters to maintain consistency across correspondence, a strange kind of literary impersonation. One graffiti from a camp near the Danube reads Marcus to Julia. My heart marches faster than my feet. Scholars aren't sure if Marcus wrote that himself or paid a clever tentmate with poetic leanings. What is clear is that romantic writing became a small but steady business within the ranks. But it wasn't just lovers. Some letters begged forgiveness from family members. Others boasted of imaginary victories, padded with flourishes to impress townsfolk. And a few hired scribes added veiled requests for money, framing them as heroic sacrifices. I endure hardship, not for gold, but glory. Yet a little silver from your hands would soothe my aching feet. Scribes often charged extra for neat handwriting, double for Latin sprinkled with Greek phrases. One self-styled Cupid's clerk was known for offering heartbreak insurance. If the letter caused a breakup, the next one was half price. Historians still argue whether that was a real policy or just a clever bit of advertising carved into a mess table. The ethics were murky. Some officers saw letter writing as a breach of privacy, or even potential risk messages could be intercepted, revealing troop positions or morale. But most looked the other way, recognizing that morale was often boosted by words sent and received no matter who composed them. Inside the tent, the scribe finishes the letter with a flourish, signs the soldier's name in bold, and melts wax for a seal. The recipient will never know the pen was held by another hand. Or perhaps she will, and not care. In Rome, even love could be subcontracted. As the candle sputters and the tent flap flutters in the breeze, the ghostwriter leans back, shaking out his hand. He's not a poet, not officially, but tonight he made someone feel remembered. And that, too, has its price. Dice clatter across a makeshift table, bone cubes bouncing over leather, chased by shouts, groans, and the occasional curse in a half-dozen dialects. You're on the quieter fringe of the Roman camp, but it feels more like a tavern than a garrison. This is the gambling pit, where pay disappears faster than wine, and chance is a profession. Roman soldiers, like bored humans everywhere, sought entertainment. And with little free time and less free income, games of chance quickly evolved from pastime to side hustle. Talented gamblers, those with sharp eyes, steady hands, and clever mouths, could turn a day's pay into a small fortune, or lose it all by nightfall. The favorite was Aaliyah, an early version of dice played with elaborate rules and wild improvisation. Soldiers carved their own sets from bone wood, or lead sometimes weighing them slightly for a lucky edge. They played for food trinkets' favors, and mostly coin. But cards weren't yet invented, so everything depended on rolls and reputation. One soldier in Britannia, nicknamed Three-Fingered Tullius, was rumored to win even when drunk, a feat many suspected had more to do with sleight of hand than fate. Some called him a cheat. Others just kept losing to him. Historians still debate whether Tullius ended up wealthy or in chains. Surviving records merely note he was transferred south unexpectedly. And gambling wasn't limited to dice. Shell games, improvised boards, and even live animal races cropped up. A camel-foot race staged in Egypt between two half-starved donkeys allegedly resulted in 5 soldiers being docked, pay for inciting disorder during mealtime. Some scholars doubt the story, but others cite it as evidence of how deeply gambling bled into every layer of military life. Officers frowned on the practice, of course. Officially, gambling was banned during active duty. Unofficially, a winning streak might curry favor or earn a loan forgiven. And for the losers, debts meant doing chores, scrubbing armor, or giving up rations, sometimes even sandals. The garrison economy turned on these invisible exchanges. You'd see one soldier working extra kitchen shifts, another lending his cloak, mysteriously cooperative for a few days. Behind many of these trades, dice, or the loss of a bet nobody else remembered but everyone enforced. Tonight, you watch a young recruit win 3 small coins, grin like a hero, and walk off into the dark. Behind him, the older soldier he beat simply shakes his head and reshuffles the dice in his palm, muttering about luck and lessons. No hard feelings, or maybe just delayed ones. There is no scholarly consensus on how tolerated this gambling economy really was. Some argue it boosted morale, others say it corroded discipline. What's clear is this: in a world built on orders, rolls of bone offered a brief illusion of control. The table grows quiet now. One last bet, one last laugh, and maybe tomorrow the dice will fall your way. A rich, savory aroma curls through the chill night air, lentils stewing with garlic onions, sizzling on a flat stone, and somewhere the unmistakable scent of singed meat fat. You follow the trail to a low fire where a soldier stands hunched over a battered bronze pan, stirring with the precision of a seasoned chef. He isn't on kitchen duty. He's cooking for cash. Within the Roman legions, food was a constant concern. Rations were reliable in theory, but in practice, bland and repetitive hardtack vinegar, and the infamous pulse a gruel that could bore a wild boar. Some soldiers learned to endure it. Others, more enterprising, saw an opportunity to spice things up and get paid. Enter the camp chefs. These were soldiers who turned mess into meal. With foraged herbs, stolen wine, and careful timing, they created stews, roasts, and flatbreads that quickly became legendary among comrades. For a small fee, or the right barter, you could upgrade your meal from survival to satisfaction. One well-known example is a cook nicknamed Pansa, the pan stationed in Judea. He made a lentil dish so beloved that soldiers offered guard rotations just to snag a portion. A fragment of graffiti in his camp reads, Pansa feeds the stomach, not the empire. Scholars disagree on whether this was admiration or sarcasm. Ingredients varied wildly depending on location. Soldiers in Gaul might trade with locals for cheese and apples. Those in Africa bartered for spices, dates, or goat meat. Some chefs cultivated their own herbs behind tents, parsley, oregano, wild garlic, earning reputations as amateur apothecaries as much as cooks. It wasn't always legal. Official rations were supposed to be shared equally, and side cooking risked creating social rifts. But enforcement was rare, and commanders often turned a blind eye, especially if they too received the occasional flavored dish. Some officers quietly hired talented soldiers to prepare their private meals, blurring the line between camaraderie and contract. One quirky case tells of a legionary who cooked only on alternating days, claiming it aligned with the favorable phases of Luna, whether superstition or savvy marketing. His meals sold out quickly, especially after a few patrons claimed improved digestion. Historians continue to debate whether this was sincere belief or culinary flair. As you crouch near the fire, the chef ladles stew into chipped bowls with the flourish of a seasoned showman. His audience waits patiently, chatting, laughing, clinking coins, or whispering promises of future favors. He doesn't wear an apron, just his armor greaves, dusted with flower helm, resting beside the pot like a kettle lid. The fire snaps and pops, casting gold onto bronze. In this moment, the war feels far away, and the camp becomes something softer. Warm food, warm hands, a temporary peace bought with coin and cumin. And tomorrow, if the stew runs out early, there'll be grumbling. Not about Caesar or battles, but about dinner. Because even in Rome's mighty war machine, a good meal was worth more than a clean sword. In a quiet corner of the camp, away from the clang of weapons and shouts of drill masters, a different sound echoes softly, the tap of a chisel, the scrape of brush on bronze, the hush of quiet concentration. You follow it to a makeshift lean-to, where a soldier crouches carving a horse's head into a scrap of wood. His face is calm. His world for a moment is entirely artistic. Though Rome's military machine was built on precision and discipline, its ranks held more than fighters. Scattered among the armor-clad were painters, sculptors, woodworkers, and helmet decorators. These were the hidden artisans of the legion's men who brought beauty into barracks and turned battlefield boredom into craft. Some soldiers personalized their gear, etching family symbols into shields or painting subtle designs on helmets. Others went further, creating statuettes of gods, busts of commanders, or tiny altars for camp rituals. What started as personal expression often became side business, a well-sculpted laurel wreath for a general's statue that might earn you enough coin to skip a march or buy better boots. One soldier, remembered only as Lucius of Lines, was famed for decorating tent interiors with murals of imagined cities and romantic battles. His art attracted visitors from other cohorts, and rumor has it he once painted a satirical portrait of a tribune that mysteriously vanished, only to reappear, redacted and repainted, hanging behind the commander's seat. These artisans worked with whatever they could find: olive wood scraps, discarded metal-colored sand ash, and even crushed beetles for pigment. They carved, painted, and sculpted in stolen moments, during break sleepless nights, or on long patrols. It wasn't always encouraged. Idle hands, after all, worried commanders. But the results often won tolerance, even admiration. Some scholars remain puzzled by just how much art filtered through these rugged camps. Was it nostalgia for home religious devotion, or simply a human urge to shape the world into something softer? Probably all three. Surviving relics suggest a surprising sophistication, with detailed miniatures and vibrant designs far beyond crude doodles. A few of these soldier artists found patrons higher ups who commissioned camp altars or decorative crests. Their work even traveled. Figurines made in Germania have been unearthed in marketplaces in Rome, suggesting trade or gifting networks that extended far beyond a single outpost. Tonight, the artisan before you holds up a finished carving, a wolf crouched mid-leap, its back arched with motion. He runs a finger over its spine, nods once, then sets it aside. Tomorrow, it might become part of someone's shield, or someone's shrine, or maybe just someone's comfort, tucked inside a satchel and kept close. In a world of orders and violence, these quiet makers carved out something softer, literal corners of beauty in the dust and grime. Not everyone knew their names, but their marks lingered, etched into the Empire's armor, scratched into its silence. Boots pound the dirt as a young courier bolts from the camp gate's scroll tube strapped to his back sandals, flapping breath sharp in the cool morning air. He's not running for glory. He's running for money. This is the message man, a soldier by day, a delivery service by necessity. Communication was the lifeblood of Rome's far-flung empire, and while official couriers handled state dispatches, gaps remained. Soldiers filled those gaps, delivering private messages, unofficial updates, even coded letters between lovers, spies, or smugglers. For the right fee, they'd run scrolls faster than the Empire's bureaucracy ever could. These delivery hustlers weren't random volunteers. They were chosen for speed, stamina, and discretion, some trained by running loops around camp, while others bribed stable hands to borrow horses for longer trips. A well-connected message man could earn more in a week than a centurion made in a month if he survived the route. The roads were dangerous. Bandits, wild animals, and enemy scouts lurked beyond the mile markers. One courier famously pretended to be a drunken pilgrim to slip past a rebel blockade scrolls hidden in his boot soles. Whether true or embellished, his tale appears in a tavern mural near Massilia, painted beside the phrase, "faster than fear." Messages ranged from mundane to monumental. A scroll might contain a love note, a gambling debt reminder, or a desperate plea for reinforcements. One humorous example involved a soldier who paid to have a detailed complaint about camp rations delivered to his brother, a baker in Rome. The brother sent back a basket of dried figs and a note suggesting his sibling try joining the Navy instead. Historians continue to debate how formalized these message men became. Were they unofficial but tolerated? Or did some become part of a quiet shadow network, helping keep the empire stitched together with parchment and foot blisters? Camp commanders rarely acknowledged them outright, but scroll deliveries almost always arrived. Soldiers knew who to ask. Fees were whispered, timing was tracked, and in return, secrets flowed faster than legions. You watch as the courier rounds a bend, dust spiraling behind him. In his pouch might be a confession, a command, or just a joke written for someone stationed 2 valleys away. Whatever it is, it matters. enough to risk sore calves and hungry wolves. At dusk, another courier returns, cloak torn face, flushed with sun and sweat. He hands off a sealed scroll and collapses by the fire, grinning faintly. His boots are nearly worn through. His pay will buy new ones. In a world of sword points and empire speed was power, and some soldiers learned to sell that speed one breathless mile at a time. You duck beneath a drooping canvas flap and are met with the sharp, earthy scent of dried herbs, basil, yarrow, mint, and a dozen more whose names you don't know. Tied in bunches, they hang from the roof beams like sleepy bats. Beneath them, a soldier carefully crushes leaves into a powder, humming softly. Welcome to the tent of the herbal side trader. Roman soldiers marched through many landscapes, from alpine forests to Egyptian deserts. Along the way, some discovered the lucrative possibilities of local flora. Herbs for healing, spices for flavor, and plants whispered to offer other effects. While the army had official medics and apothecaries, they didn't travel with stocked pharmacies. That left a fragrant gap for the clever to fill. These amateur herbalists began by learning from local healers, women in village squares, elders in mountain huts, shepherds who knew which flowers bees preferred. With a little charm and some coin, soldiers picked up recipes for teas that eased sore muscles, pastes that stopped bleeding, and salves to cool the fevered brow. Soon enough, they were growing, trading, and selling their own blends. One soldier, stationed in Dalmatia, became known as Spurius the Sniffer for his uncanny ability to identify herbs by scent alone. He claimed his sleep potion could knock out a lion or a senator. No surviving lions confirmed the claim, but several officers supposedly bought bottles for use during long war councils. Some scholars suspect these concoctions were mostly wine with thyme. Others argue there was real skill behind the recipes. The trade was subtle. Coins were often replaced by favors traded for preferred watch shifts or fresh rations. Some soldiers kept their mixtures, secret hiding jars beneath their beds, or sewn into saddle packs. There was a mild risk. Herbal sales weren't outlawed, but any suggestion of witchcraft or poisoning drew unwanted attention. Still, no empire runs on suspicion alone, and the demand for relief always outpaced the risk. Among the more peculiar records is a dried letter found near the Rhine, a soldier, thanking his friend for the bundle that soothed my boils and calmed my bunkmate's stomach. Whether miracle or placebo, the effect was profitable. Over time, these herbalists created reputations within the legions. One tent might be known for stomach powder, another for love root, an aphrodisiac of dubious merit. Superstition swirled alongside science. Some swore that mint under the tongue gave strength before battle. Others claimed basil in the boots warded off blisters. Few agreed on results, but all agreed the right herb in the right hands changed everything. The tent rustles as another soldier steps in, coins ready, pointing at a bundle that promises sleep without dreams. The herbalist says nothing, just nods and passes it over. Another quiet deal. Another coin earned in the shadow of the standard. Even as Rome marched with might and steel, it moved too on leaves, powders, and the invisible remedies bundled in burlap and belief. Just past the edge of the torchlit path beyond, where officers tend to glance, a narrow trail dips into darkness. Worn boot prints mark the way, but no signs point there. You follow it through brambles and silence, and soon find a figure crouched by a low wall, exchanging a nod and a wrapped parcel with a cloaked man. This isn't a patrol. This is smuggling on the side. Roman law was extensive, but Roman greed was often cleverer. Many provinces were rich with restricted goods. Spices taxed heavily silks, guarded by guilds' animal skins marked for export only. Soldiers, with access to borderlands, supply chains, and local contacts, became prime candidates for smuggling. They moved quietly, not out of rebellion, but out of necessity and profit. It wasn't just exotic luxuries. Even mundane items like grain salt or dyed fabrics could fetch double their value when slipped past checkpoints. The Army's rigid logistics often created scarcity. One outpost drowned in olives, another starved for oil. Side traders stepped in to rebalance things for a modest fee. Some smuggled with flair. One cohort allegedly hollowed out wagon axles to stash saffron threads. Another tied coin-filled pouches beneath goat bellies. One creative scheme used religious statues to hide amphorae of banned wine piously illegal. Historians remain divided on how widespread these tactics were, though a few seized shipments lend credence to at least some. Of course, the stakes were high. Getting caught meant more than a slap on the wrist. Fines, lashes, demotion, or worse, reassignment to swamp duty. And yet stories abound of soldiers caught once and trying again later. The margins were simply too tempting. Not every smuggler was greedy. Some just needed coin to send home. Others bartered quietly for local goods, trading Roman blades for tribal remedies or foreign fabrics. These exchanges, though frowned upon, sometimes helped maintain fragile peace along tense borders. When coins ran low, contraband became currency. One soldier left behind a coded ledger, scratched into wax tablets, now in a museum, strange symbols denoting quantities, dates, and the word white wind repeated often. Some believe it referred to rare silk from the east. Others argue it was salt. One rogue theory claims it was a euphemism for fermented cheese. Scholars continue to argue in highly academic tones. Back on the path, the cloaked figure fades into the trees. The soldier tucks his earnings into a belt pouch and walks back to camp with a practiced yawn. No one stops him. No one asks. In an army built on order, chaos had its price tag and its customers. A nearby torch crackles. The camp seems peaceful. But beneath the calm, 100 quiet transactions pulse like a hidden current, keeping the wheels of empire greased not just by law, but by loopholes. And sometimes all it takes to shift a fortune is a sealed pouch, a silent nod, and a trail few admit exists. The fire crackles low, casting shadows that dance across worn leather boots and faces lined with the grit of long marches. A few soldiers gather closer, clutching cloaks and cups of sour wine. One older man clears his throat, raises an eyebrow, and begins, "There once was a fish in the Tiber who sang prophecies to a drunken priest." A chuckle ripples through the group. You've found the campfire storyteller, the soldier who speaks for coin, not command. Not every side hustle in Rome's legions involved tools or trade. Some relied solely on imagination. With evenings long and distractions, few stories became their own currency. Soldiers swapped ghost tales, wild exaggerations, historical myths turned inside out. And among them, a few rose to fame not for rank, but for narrative flair. These storytellers were rarely the loudest. They knew how to pause, how to draw out tension, how to make a crackling twig feel like a ghost's footfall. Some developed regular repertoires, tales of sea serpents in the Adriatic of emperors, born from thunderclouds of haunted helmets found in old battlefields. Listeners might pay a few coins a piece of bread, or even protection from latrine duty just for the next tale. One famous yarn spinner, nicknamed Cassius the Crooked, allegedly survived 3 campaigns by talking his way out of trouble. His stories were so engrossing that even irritable centurions delayed punishments to hear how the tale ended. He once claimed to have dined with a Vestal virgin disguised as a goat. Most agreed it was nonsense. All agreed it was entertaining. There was more to it than fun. Then, stories calmed nerves, reinforced unit bonds, and gave shape to the chaos of war. A monster in the woods was easier to fear than the randomness of ambush. A heroic deserter in a tale made a brother's disappearance more palatable. In many ways, storytelling softened the sharp edges of reality. Some tales slipped into legend. One scroll found buried in a collapsed fort contains a detailed story of a soldier who dreamed of Mars granting him immortality only to wake with a rock in his hand and a promotion. No name, no author. But the tale was copied again in later graffiti, suggesting it traveled far, told again and again. Historians still debate whether these storytellers were encouraged or merely tolerated. Some officers feared their tales undermined discipline, especially when jokes veered into satire. Others quietly attended sessions cloaked in shadows, laughing at themselves in disguise. You sit a little closer as the soldier's voice dips. The Fish in the Tiber has now revealed that Rome's true ruler is a cat wearing Caesar's laurel wreath and refusing all tributes except mice. The men laugh softly, not loudly, not disruptively, just enough to forget where they are. The story winds down. The speaker sips wine and leans back silent again. Another tale paid for in denarii, or bread. In an empire of orders, stories still bought peace. By moonlight, you spot him kneeling beside a crate fiddling with a sandal-strap needle in hand, lips pursed in focus. Nearby, another soldier gently tests the flex of a repaired shield. The scent of pitch and leather hangs thick in the air. This is not a workshop. It's a corner of camp where petty repairs turn quiet profits one stitch at a time. Roman soldiers were issued gear, but not endlessly. A split sole or cracked greave might mean marching in pain, or worse, failing to stand in formation. The army had armorers, but they were few, overworked, and often slow. So naturally, some soldiers filled the gap, becoming unofficial fixers, cobblers, and tinkerers. Their motto patch now fight later. These handymen weren't always trained artisans. Many learned by necessity, repairing their own equipment until neighbors started asking for help. With a borrowed awl, some spare hide, and a pinch of resourcefulness, they transformed mess tents into mobile workshops. Services ranged from basic stitching to complex rivet work. A skilled fixer could turn a battered scutum into something parade-worthy, or at least rain-resistant. One particularly enterprising repairman in Hispania, dubbed Nonius the Needle, earned a small following for customizing gear. He replaced cracked shield rims with decorative brass. He reinforced boots with an extra layer of wool. He even carved initials into belt buckles for a fee. Some officers frowned. Others quietly ordered their own gear through him. What began as convenience quickly became commerce. Repairs were priced by urgency. A same-day sandal patch might cost 3 denarii, a decorative upgrade 5. Those with no coin bartered usually in rations chores, or the ever-popular, "I'll take your watch tomorrow." Not every job was glamorous. Soldiers brought in lice-infested cloaks, rusted buckles armor soaked in gods know what. One fixer allegedly charged double for any item that smelled like a latrine on festival day. Some scholars still debate whether that was a standing policy or battlefield folklore. Either way, it was effective branding. Though technically discouraged soldiers were supposed to report damaged gear to quartermasters, The handymen often worked openly. They kept the camp running. After all, a repaired sword hilt could mean the difference between defense and disaster. And commanders knew that keeping soldiers comfortable, even through unofficial channels, meant better discipline overall. By firelight, you watch as the fixer threads a final stitch, knots it with practice flicks, and hands the sandal back. The recipient nods, drops a coin, and walks off into the dark steps, now steady. The fixer doesn't look up. Another soldier is already waiting, holding out a helmet with a crack along the crest. Without a word, he takes it, inspects the damage, and sets to work. Tools clink. Leather creaks. The quiet rhythm resumes. In a world that prized strength, speed, and swordplay, there was another kind of power in knowing how to mend. The Empire marched on roads, but it also marched on souls that didn't split straps, that didn't snap, and shields that didn't leak. Quiet work, loud consequences. The camp lies still now, its torches dim to embers, and the stars overhead gleaming like scattered coins. In the hush, you hear whispers, soft talk about money, owed food, shared debts still lingering. You realize that beneath every hustle, every gamble, and every clever fix, one truth hums quietly through the tents. For many Roman soldiers, side jobs weren't ambition, they were survival. Officially, the legion promised food shelter and regular pay. But the reality, stipends were delayed deductions rampant, and bonuses often swallowed by bureaucracy or corruption. A soldier's base wage couldn't stretch to cover wine gifts for home better gear, or a moment of comfort in a faraway province. And so the hustling wasn't optional. It was as vital as water. Some troops thrived in this shadow economy. They became skilled negotiators, managers, even small-time moguls within the camp. One veteran in Gaul allegedly ran 4 side gigs simultaneously: gear repairs, letter writing, mule trading, and stew sales. He boasted of earning more than a tribune without needing to salute one. Whether exaggerated or not, his type wasn't rare. Others did what they could. A few extra coins from laundry work, a shared profit from a dice game, the sale of a carved trinket to a visiting merchant. Each hustle added up, helping a soldier avoid debt, send coin home, or save for retirement. It wasn't greed. It was a strategy, a buffer against the Empire's indifference. Some soldiers sent funds to family. Others bought discharge papers early. A handful saved enough to purchase land or open taverns when their campaigns ended. But many never made it that far. Injury, illness, or sudden orders could sweep everything away in an instant. For them, the side gigs were not a step up, they were a lifeline. There is no scholarly consensus on how many depended on these extra incomes. Some argue it was the exception, not the rule. But artifacts, engraved tools, personalized gear, coded letters suggest otherwise. The unofficial economy of the legions may have been nearly as complex as the official one, and far more human. You watch as one soldier rolls over in his sleep, clutching a pouch of coins close to his chest. Nearby, another murmurs numbers in his dreams, counting profits perhaps, or debts, or just the hours until dawn. The Empire rewarded conquest. It paraded victories, but it rarely paid promptly. And so, from smithies to soup pots, from storytelling to smuggling, the Roman army thrived on these hidden labors, the quiet work done after drills beneath notice and beneath moonlight. You step away from the tents, the scents and sounds fading behind you. The wind rustles through grass and canvas. Somewhere a night watchman hums off key. You don't know his name, but odds are he's doubling as a messenger or a seller of charms. because in Rome's mighty war machine, even the night shift comes with a side hustle. And so, the fires of the Roman camp burn low, the last dice packed away, the last stew ladled, the last letter sealed in wax. Around you, the army sleeps, not just as soldiers, but as smiths, cooks, gamblers, poets, and hustlers, each one clinging quietly to dignity in an empire that rarely offered it freely. Their armor may have gleamed in parades, but it was patched with the threads of side work, silent negotiations, and private ambitions. They fought not only enemies, but short pay and long nights. And in doing so, they made the Roman army more than a war machine. It became a marketplace of hidden lives. As you drift, let the echoes of those quiet labors fade gently. The brush of a scribe's stylus, the hiss of meat on a fire, the chime of coins passed hand to hand. These were the sounds of survival whispered through centuries. If this helped you rest tonight, drop your time plus city in the comments and tell me which forgotten character or tale you want next.